I'm Lisa Anderson, host of Supply Chain Chats and president of LMA Consulting Group. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Erica Dill. We're going to talk about consumer products and what's going on in that field, how it relates to China, and who knows where we'll take the conversation. But I'm thrilled to be here with Erica. Erica Dill is a fractional COO and the current COO of Tombot, a robotics company, where she brings operational leadership to consumer products and e-commerce brands looking to scale. Over the past decade, she's built international supply chains from the ground up, standing up manufacturer relationships and quality control across a variety of foreign countries with a heavy focus on China. She's designed the operational systems growing companies need to scale reliably, specializing in building and operations, processes, and systems that let businesses run more efficiently and maximize profitability. So we are like-minded. And so I'm thrilled to be here today. So Erica, what do you think is going on in terms of consumer products and China? And we'll get started there.
I was going to say, so much to talk about. Things have been changing so rapidly. And, as we were talking about Christmas last year, and now we're heading into another Q4, it always comes up because when we're talking about consumer goods, you think about toys. Toy manufacturing capital of the world is in China. And so the consumers feel that tariff cost directly when we're talking about Christmas being a big one, because every time there's volatility in, duties, taxes, tariffs, you feel that, whether, it's toys and you're talking about a zero base. And kind of a little background for people who may not know, there's a base, tariff tax based on your category. Toys is an exempt category, as an example. But then there's these additional tariffs. And last year, when the administration had changed a bunch of things and put extra taxes on, those were the additional taxes on top of that. So, people used to get that zero tax on toys, so it didn't impact them. But then once you start adding 15, 20, 30%, that's when you see the price of the product start to change. And one of the things, that is leading Tombot and other consumer goods companies to have this China plus one strategy is the volatility that is happening. And one of the things that just happened recently, I should say is still happening, is the Lindsey Graham bill. Yeah. So for those people who aren't know, Lindsey passed away. And in his honor, the House and the Senate got together, and it's bipartisan. So we've got people on both sides that put this together, and it gives the president the ability to add up to 100% tariff on the top 5 countries that purchase oil from Russia. So just so everybody understands that, you've got your base tariff in China, and then the administration can add another 100%. The number one purchaser of Russian oil is China. So, hypothetically, we could be seeing an extra 100% tariff on top of that. So Erica, that changes this.
Oh, sorry. You said up to 100%. Is that right? So it's not, doesn't have to be. Wow. But that is a significant stick, I guess you could say.
Well, that puts us right back where we were in spring of last year with, what got up to 130 some odd percent. So we're going to feel that if that happens. There's no real sense right now about what the administration will do should that pass, but it's a bipartisan bill. So it's very, very realistic to pass. The China plus one strategy comes in to kind of counteract that. And that's where you might start by developing your product in China and working with them, because that's where manufacturing makes sense. But a lot of people and a lot of companies in China are setting up other manufacturers outside of China. So you kind of have this getting some of your raw components still from China because nobody else produces them. Let's talk about PCB board components. Those just aren't coming from anywhere else.
It's highly concerning how we got ourselves into this position, I would say. But to your point, so that's what China plus one means, because to your point, I don't know if everyone knows, but most companies at least consumer products companies, are producing in China. So like what you're saying is that with the risks of the tariffs, like we have the new Lindsey Graham bill that's very likely going through. So that gives the opportunity for more tariffs with little to no notice. And there's other challenges geopolitically, obviously. And so with that said, folks are moving towards this China plus one policy, which means going to another country as well. Is that what that means?
Yeah. So really it means by having a redundancies in a more complex supply chain. When I talk a lot about international supply chains, it's not a default. You don't default to just manufacturing in China. You have to really look at your complete landed costs of, where that affects, because moving to other countries can add different transportation costs and its own tariffs and its own risks, and what type of products you're producing, textiles versus consumer electronics. But even Foxconn, like they have set up manufacturing in other countries and Mexico. So your iPhone could realistically not be produced in China very soon, because that's what this plus one strategy is, you would take those components, because for people who don't know how tariffs are calculated, it's based on the percentage of materials that come from the different countries. So, for example, if you want to produce products in the US that are US made, only, 50 to 60% have to be produced in the US. So you can import some of those raw components, PCBAs, or the components that go on them from other countries and still be made in America. So, Tombot, for example, is looking at evaluating these types of scenarios. And we're going to have to, purchase some products from China. It's inevitable. But labor or sub-assemblies or injection molding parts, you can do those in other countries and have this China plus one or this more comprehensive supply chain to minimize some of that tariff risk.
So in essence, it easily is going to get more complex supply chain wise, because folks are trying to navigate, the tariffs, but I imagine, at least in my world, they're also concerned about the geopolitical risk and the ability to supply customers, without disruptions occurring. Is that true in your world as well?
Absolutely. There's tariffs, there's oil costs, there's stock strikes, there's certain straits of bodies of water that are getting shut down. You never know. It's a moving target every day. You never know what's going to happen. Supply chain is not boring, and hasn't been since COVID.
That's true.
But you just don't know what's happening next. And so, those of us in supply chain, which you are very well aware of, have had to be a little bit more nimble and thinking and having these plan A, B, C, D, Q, F is, and be prepared. And so that's part of that plus one strategy.
I have a question about that. So I know that prior to the current administration, there was a lot of companies that were like going to Mexico as an example, and they were like really, what do they call it? I don't know. They basically were importing from China to Mexico and then like doing something minor to it and then sending it into the US. And I believe that they've put some laws in place so that can't happen. So China plus one is not doing that. It's really more towards producing in another country, let's say Mexico, but it's also, they may get some materials from China. Or tell us about the difference between those.
Yeah, great question. There is a certain percentage that has to be produced in that country, a certain percentage of the cost in order for it to be made in that country. So you can't just buy finished goods from China, send them to another country, put them in a box and call it made in Vietnam.
Probably good.
But if we're talking consumer electronics, your PCBA boards with all their components, those can come from China. But maybe the injection molded housing, maybe you have motors, maybe you have these other components that are produced in, let's just say Vietnam. And as long as it's whatever percentage that is, so for example, certain products are 51%. is made in, let's use our example of Vietnam, then it doesn't matter that the components come wherever. It can say made in Vietnam. Now you'll still pay tariffs on those components, but you can say made in Vietnam, and that changes the game completely. So in the Mexico strategy, you bring in, or the US, if you want to produce in the US, you bring in those subcomponents or those sub-assemblies and then do a majority of 51% of the work in that country. And now you've got a made in Mexico or made in the USA product.
Made in the US. Okay. That's interesting. And to your point about Vietnam, I know that's been gaining momentum, certainly as folks are trying to mitigate their risk in China. I've also understood, though, that a lot of Chinese companies are setting up shop in Vietnam. So I don't know what that really means, though, because it seems like that could add additional risk again. But at least it's being made in Vietnam. Is that the way it's, or, I don't know. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the benefit is that these Chinese companies have all of the skill. They've been producing these products for decades. So, they know what's involved, and they have the skill set and the designing and the engineers. So they take that factory plan and footprint and everything and just plop it in another country. Now, there is some risks to that. Number one, they still have a language barrier issue, because now we're talking Chinese to Vietnamese as an example. But there's also a labor force risk. So the labor force in China is very well developed, and this is a very, solid workforce. Some of these other countries still have some volatility because they're still growing, and they don't have that trained workforce that has been developing for decades. But it is, you have these companies that are basically doing their engineering, their production line setup, their PVT, they might be doing EVT, DVT, and PVT all in China. And then once they have the production line set, picking it up and plopping it in another country. Now you're dealing with professionals who've been doing this. You're dealing with the QC levels and everything. It's just made in a different country. And so if you ever go to Canton, for people in consumer products, it's a huge Chinese expo in Guangzhou, where you could do your sourcing. They'll advertise and say, like, Asian solution. And it's, Cambodia, Vietnam, India, or wherever. And so you can very quickly see Thailand's another big one. So you can see, like, hey, this company has multiple facilities and they can help me with that +1 strategy.
I see. So it's similar, in essence, you're theoretically creating a win-win because they have some of the expertise that they can carry over, and they don't have to start from scratch. But on the other hand, it is building at least the labor force and the skills in Vietnam, so that theoretically they could expand, once they're building up, right? So in a way,
absolutely,
that can be a win. On the other hand, it does still contain some risk, because if China wants to stop production, they by all means can, since they own that company. So that's like a catch-22. Although I guess they don't own the people. So they won't be able to get the materials. So it's a catch-22.
But they're also,
go ahead.
They're also a very big investor. They want to see their business succeed, right? And they see the writing on the wall that they are losing business in China. I made multiple trips last year, multiple sourcing trips. And, I just happened to be there in spring last year for Canton. And then I went back in fall for Canton. And by the time I went back for fall, me going and doing manufacturing visits, people were like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming." They've always been a very, welcoming group, the manufacturers to companies in the US. But it was more so because their business had dropped from the US 30, 40, 50%. And what was interesting, even between spring and fall, is all the consumer products companies had retargeted their business, and now we're getting more certifications in Europe. And the big one that I saw was the Middle East. They were starting to service and advertise specifically to the Middle East standards and selling and advertising more to those countries, because they had lost so much business in the US. So because they're looking at risks in their business, they're having to almost force themselves to go to these other countries and open up factories in order to keep their own business going. So they don't want to risk messing up there because they're just going to lose customers. And I mean, and we're talking 30, 40, 50% business change in US purchasing.
That's significant. That's interesting, really. So it sounds like the tariffs did have the intended consequences, I guess you could say.
Unfortunately, yes.
Right. I mean, that was going to be one of my next questions. You've mentioned some of the other countries, but what are you, I know it, I'm not an expert like you are in this field, but I understand that certain countries have certain specialties. I don't know, are there some more popular than others, or is it really just dependent on the product? Maybe give us like some thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. It is very dependent on the product that you're looking at. Certain countries are better with textiles, fabric, apparel. So that's a big draw. Vietnam is becoming great for consumer electronics. And that's where a lot of that is going. Like I said, Mexico, because it's so close to the US and, I'm a horrible supply chain person. I can nenever remember the acronym for the new NAFTA, but the new NAFTA.
USMCA.
Thank you. I don't know. I will forever call it NAFTA. But if, right now that's volatile, but if that goes back to its true nature, Mexico is a very logical manufacturing partner. And, Foxconn, these other large companies are setting up their own factories in Mexico, which mitigates some of the risk of manufacturing in Mexico because Mexico has its own challenges. So, we're bringing, consumer electronics there, bigger products that you don't want to put in an ocean container are great to be done in Mexico. So you definitely need to do your research on what type of product you're looking at doing. And specifically, what type of service do you need? Are you just manufacturing, or do you need engineering, designing, that new product development, roadmap? That was the benefit to China, is it was an all-in-one. They could do everything for you, build the injection molds, build all the pieces, do the engineering. Some of these other countries, when they move operations, can't facilitate that, and they're still doing it in China or other parts. So you definitely need to do your research, or contact a supply chain professional who can help you figure out where you should be going.
That's very true. And from that point of view, you work with a lot of companies that have complex engineering and design requirements. And so, but it sounds like the folks that have moved key operations out of the US, or at least consumer products wise, they didn't necessarily keep the engineering and design functions, from what you're saying. Because like the folks I'm working with are largely producing something in the US, so they have at least expertise in those areas. But it sounds like in consumer products, it's not necessarily the case.
If you think about most of the startups that are consumer goods products, it's a lot of a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, I have this great idea, I want to develop this, but they need a design firm. And there's a lot of companies, you and I are both in Southern California. There's a lot of Southern California companies that will do that work from, design, from inception, design, and prototype, and build out all the things you need, the CAD files.
That's true, actually.
And everything, and then allow you to take that to China. But that's not cheap to do in the US.
Yeah.
So a lot of these companies, so a lot of these companies can go to China and do it a lot less expensively. And the Chinese companies are so good at it that it's a solid option, because these entrepreneurs, they're not electrical engineers, they're not mechanical engineers. They just have a great idea and they need help developing that. But costs, when you're bootstrapping your own product, or you're trying to get it to the point of getting funding, you got to do all the design work, and that can be expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's a really good point. And you're right. I've actually had some people asking that exact question. And I think that a lot of times in consumer products, I mean, there's design required to your point, but it's not generally, it's not like a engineer to order complex type of product, generally speaking, but it could be, I suppose.
Well, and once you start getting into injected molded pieces, if you're doing anything with plastics, that's a whole specialty in mechanical engineering, because you have to think about how that material is being injected into the machine, and you have to design that component specifically for the manufacturing process.
Well, that brings up another really good question I have. I know that China has been really aggressive in terms of automating and utilizing robotics, and I don't know, what else. But tell us about that, because, like the old view of like you go to China because of the labor rates, that's how people got there. But now that they're there, I think that things have changed. So I don't know. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and you've actually seen rising costs in labor in China as well. It's not, Mexico labor rates have increased, China labor rates have increased. So yes, they're even moving to, robotics and automation. The US is definitely leading that charge because the labor rates are incredibly high. And so you kind of have these tiers of manufacturers in China. Your smaller manufacturers are not automating. They're still using more manual labor, but it's definitely coming, and they're leading the way. The benefit is that they're the ones building the manufacturing robots. So it's true. It's cheaper for them to implement these types of things because their manufacturer down the street is the one building the robot.
Yep. It's true. I mean, you have to, it is a catch-22. You have to keep some capabilities, or you are going to, just be costed out of the market, basically. To your point. And they have a great advantage there.
Yes. And don't even get me on my soapbox about automation, robotics, and AI. I'm a big early adopter of all three. But you have to keep that human component because the technology isn't there in a lot of cases to just fully automate. You're talking about car manufacturing lines, totally fully, robotic and automated, but you still have to have a human component in a lot of these things. So it'll be a while, but I won't get on that soapbox.
But you're absolutely right, and I agree with you. Wait, I think no one will be successful if they aren't utilizing all three of, robotics, AI, advanced technologies. On the other hand, you're absolutely right. I think supply chain is becoming, I don't know if I want to use the word harder, but like you can't, just like call it home or whatever the right phrase would be.
Set it and forget it. Nope.
Pay attention. You have to make sure you're looking for exceptions, right? Especially, I don't know. Actually, I understood that about China regardless, that, they certainly build up their quality processes, but it's not like you can just ignore it, right? Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And, I am the first one to build an agent to automate a lot of the things for me, but there's just so many complexities and so many moving pieces. I have an agent that scours and looks for, current legislation and current things going on and current topics because I can't even stay up on everything. But then, somebody has to take that thought and put it into, my automations and everything and think through what that means and be on top of that. And make some of those decisions. But, I'm the first one to use AI to help automate my processes, but it still takes a human component to make some of those decisions.
Absolutely. It can, we find that with clients, if they were to follow the suggestions, they would be in so much worse shape. You have to, it's helpful for sure. It can do the heavy lifting for you, but if you don't pay attention to what it's saying or, on the manufacturing floor, you saw the I Love Lucy show or something and everything's flying off.
Eating them and
it could happen.
Chocolate factory, absolutely.
Well, I think from the robot's point of view, so tell us about the FCC covered list. I'm interested in what is that and how does it relate to, this whole story we've been talking about today?
Yeah, in consumer good, people who are not in robotics maybe aren't aware. But the FCC just came out with a ruling for national security purposes that any moving robot that transmits information or communicates is now banned from an import standpoint from foreign manufacturers. If you think about that, who's making robots? China. So if it moves, AKA humanoid robots, quadrupeds, even your robotic vacuum, you cannot bring in new models if they are manufactured overseas. And there was an infamous story about a guy who was tinkering around and was able to hack I think it was hundreds of robotic vacuums and get in and see their mapping and basically take over control. And so from a security perspective, the government was like, no, US made only. So if you think about your Roombas, no more new models on that. And so I'm currently with a robotics company, and there's a couple of caveats. If you're an FDA product, you're exempt. So there's definitely some things that are exempt, but that could change on a whim. And what I think is important about the FCC ban is this is just robotics for now. But what does that mean for consumer electronics moving forward? What could be deemed, as we have more intelligent technology, what could they deem as national security and ban from foreign manufacturers? Is the government going to use this as a tool to control, maybe they are getting, they're getting shut down on some of the abilities on the tariff side. So what other tools can they use to help control international imports? And this is the first example of, using FCC to potentially control some of that. Obviously, a guy hacking into a bunch of robotic vacuums is a concern. But
on the other hand, it does seem like it does seem like a problem. Both are a problem. You obviously don't want somebody looking around your house or whatever could be going on. That's bad. On the other hand, since you lead a robotics company, or you're the COO for it, tell us about, I'm concerned about, on the other hand, how are we going to build the capabilities to get these robots? I'm glad that you're working on this challenge, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. So at Tombot, the current product that we're bringing to market will be an FDA product. The second iteration will be an FDA product. So that is exempt. But the first version is non-moving. So it's exempt for now. Okay. That could change. But there's a bunch of products coming out that are, these quadruped type pets, or even the humanoid robots that move. Those are now no longer produced outside. So if you want to continue that product, you have to figure out how to produce domestically, like in the US. And the US infrastructure, people like Tesla are already doing it here in the US.
So I was just going to bring up Elon Musk, because I know he's thank goodness someone's focusing on it. I guess from that point of view, since we have to rely on we have to build it quickly.
Well, and you have to think about the cost for the infrastructure for that. We do not have a workforce that's trained for anything for that. So if all these companies start wanting to do in the US, we're going to see some very interesting things. And that's when, the tariffs first happened. My first thing that I was championing is the US is not prepared. We need some major government subsidies to help these manufacturers bring manufacturing back. There are some, but it's going to, it takes a lot of money to build up facilities, build the infrastructure. They're going to have to automate and use robotics to do these manufacturing lines. And then there needs to be a workforce. And there's only so many places that have these types of workforces, and you can't develop that in a year or two. This takes years and decades to develop a workforce that in certain cities that are trained or willing or programmed to do these types of jobs.
Yeah, very true. Southern California used to be a hub for aerospace and defense. We still have some, but most corporates have moved out. But for example, there are still people with skills in those fields. And to your point, it takes time to build those kinds of skills up. I don't know that those are transferable, but like in my mind, it's related because you have to. It's gonna be a challenge. I think if nothing else, do you agree that for the next few decades, like there's going to be vast opportunities for manufacturing and supply chain and professionals?
Absolutely. If you are a professional in manufacturing and supply chain, now is a great time to be alive. You definitely have to know and learn quickly and adapt. If you are not adapting as a supply chain professional, you're going to get stuck. So you got to be nimble, and if you have manufacturing skills, potentially bringing back manufacturing to the US, those are great skills to have as these companies evaluate where they're going and needing to be open to manufacturing options. So, people looking to get into supply chain manufacturing, now is a very interesting time. And I welcome fellow professionals, because the more that we can talk and learn from each other, the better we all get and the better service we can provide.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's why I was excited to have you on the podcast today, as I think it's just such a critical topic, and it's really evolving. Like you said, since COVID. I mean, it was starting to evolve before COVID, but not really. I mean, COVID shook the world up, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
and it certainly highlighted vulnerabilities and whatnot else. So I guess with that said, it's hard to believe that time has flown by. Do you have any closing thoughts that you think we should leave our audience with?
I think we covered everything. Or as much as we could in 30 minutes. The one thing that I just want to make sure everybody knows about supply chain, it's not a set it and forget it. The days of the past of just being like, oh, well, don't worry, I'll worry about when we get there and check freight rates when we get there. It's not that way anymore. And you need to be planning ahead, and you need to be thinking, what are we doing for manufacturing 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Because if you're just trying to solve the problems of today, you will have problems literally tomorrow or next week. So keep an eye on, FCC bans and legislation, and the geopolitical things that are going on, because it has become a major risk for your company. And you need to add that to your risk factors when evaluating, because if you can't manufacture or you're paying 100% tariff, you could be priced out.
Absolutely. I think it's going to vastly change the global supply chains. And I also think it's going to provide equal, for those that are doing what you said, Erica, I believe they'll be wildly successful and they'll have more opportunities than they could know what to do with. On the other hand, if you stay still, I think, you don't have a future. So I think it's, winners are going to be separated from the losers like no other time.
Absolutely.
History.
Those who can adapt will succeed. It's Darwinism at its best.
Yeah, I think so. Well, so given that, where can folks, find out more about you, Erica, so that we can give them some where they can go?
I am happy to answer questions or give tips. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, just Erica Dill like the pickle. My website is operationallyup.com, so feel free to check that out for tips and tricks, and feel free to ping me with a question. I'm happy to answer those for you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Supply Chain Chats, and we will continue on the conversation with the next related topic to China and the supply chain next time. So thank you all.